Welcome back, Guardians. In today's report, we will be presenting the ultimate downfall of Lysander and his political faction, the Concordat. But to explain thoroughly and establish the most concrete story, we have to better understand the fragile political peace the Last City currently has. Many attribute the safety of the Last City to the Traveler, our god of light. But in reality, the Traveler, especially in its current hibernation, is just one piece of a multitude that all provide security for the city and its human holdout. First, we should understand and explain the consensus, the ruling body of the Last City, and the pseudo-government ruling over all political and non-political events. The consensus was first established as an alliance between the Last City factions after the faction wars. Now, the faction wars were ultimately ended when Guardians entered the conflict, ending skirmishes inside and around the Last City. The consensus operates as an avenue for the factions to communicate with civility, although that term is used lightly. The Vanguard and the Speaker, along with New Monarchy, Dead Orbit, and Future War Cult, dictate policy and faction grievances and employ laws affecting the entirety of the city. The Speaker acts as a direct head of state for this new government, often intervening and determining the best course of political action for the consensus. The Vanguard, on the other hand, only pushes their agenda and influence in a limited fashion, often moving their own plans forward without consulting the rest of the members. But the Vanguard is often brought in to litigate and advise the factions in political matters, as many of the various factions have begun recruiting Guardians to their cause, most likely to better prepare for what looks to be future open conflict. The current members of the consensus are the Speaker, the Vanguard, New Monarchy, Future War Cult, and finally, Dead Orbit. Now that we have a better understanding of the political nature and makeup of the Last City, we can directly address the troubling events of the Concordat Rebellion and ultimate expulsion from the consensus. The faction rivalry we see today between New Monarchy, Future War Cult, and Dead Orbit are just scars of greater conflicts that arose in the past. And while we may live in one of the most peaceful times in city history, there are visible wounds that fester. One such wound is the Concordat and its leader, Lysander. Anyone who names themselves Lysander after the Spartan admiral and statesman of the Peloponnesian War clearly fancies himself a man destined for legend. But history books aside, the consensus has clearly done everything in its power to remove important pieces of information regarding Lysander. All we know are simple but concrete facts. Firstly, Lysander's rebellion began sometime after the Battle of Twilight Gap. Now, to refresh, Twilight Gap was the large Fallen conflict that almost saw the death of the Last City, when the united Fallen houses made a gambit against the city and its guardian defenders. Ultimately, the united houses were defeated, but the city and its defenders were utterly decimated, leaving room for a particular faction leader and his Concordat to rise up and abolish the consensus. But here's where the city libraries fail to explain the Concordat and Lysander completely. Why did he rebel? And what does his faction believe in? What was their ideology? The true oddity is that this information on Lysander seems to have been removed, that his legacy is to be stricken from the record and his name only whispered. Even Ikora Rey, when speaking of the Crucible Arena bannerfall, has been heard saying, "There was a campaign to call it Lysander's Folly, but I don't want people even remembering his name." Odd. What could drive the Vanguard to such aggressive action against historical record? Here's what the records do say. The Concordat was in direct opposition with the Speaker and often clashed with the New Monarchy's ideology. Now, the New Monarchy believed in restoring humanity's golden age and ultimately removing the consensus in favor for an eternal, incorruptible despot. Their choice man, or awoken for the job, is none other than the Vanguard's Zavala. So what could put the Concordat at odds with New Monarchy? It's possible that Lysander saw himself as the only true leader for the city, and any other monarch was either unworthy or a simple pretender. It's also possible Lysander just didn't believe in the ruling government or the speaker, and wanted a reformed system, especially after the disorganized offensive the factions provided during Twilight Gap. A final, I'll bet interesting note is the word most commonly associated with Lysander and the Concordat, the term crusade. It isn't known if the term is used facetiously, in a manner used to mock and insult, or if Lysander viewed himself as a true man of religion. Without more information, we simply don't know. But one could speculate that if the speaker is seen as our high priest to the traveler, then the term crusade, when applied to Concordat, could be religious in nature. Ultimately, the Concordat's rebellion would fail. The last holdouts, along with Lysander, would surrender in the tower and now crucible arena called Bannerfall, also known to some as Lysander's Folly. Guardians from New Monarchy would secure the Concordat's surrender, but interestingly, Lysander, after committing what some would call high treason, is allowed exile and not capital punishment. The remaining Guardians and supporters in the Concordat would be folded into the future War Cult, which would take the consensus seat now left vacant. There was also the Cemetery, followers of Ulan Tan, but they were deemed too fanatic to be gifted a consensus seat. With Lysander exiled and silenced into the wilderness of Earth, and the Concordat's ideology now outlawed, the consensus closed another chapter of political upheaval in the last city's long and brutal history. But there are rumors, or at least whispers, of Lysander's return. That Guardians and supporters alike leave gifts and offerings in his name across the city. Now, of course, such actions are deemed hostile to city peace and are punishable, but if these rumors are true, Lysander gathers strength in the wilderness, biding his time for an opportunity to claim vengeance and rescue the last city from a tyrannical and misguided consensus. Each of the factions claim to know the true path, the one saving grace that will provide for all of us. But that type of thought led us to the faction wars, and those scars are still visible. Be careful who you side with. You may find new allies in your allegiances, but those allies harbor enemies, and so too will you. Stay safe, Guardians, wherever your loyalties lie. Hey guys, Taylor here. I just want to let you know that I've started a Patreon page. Now, it's 100% optional and it is no ways required, but it's just an additional way to get support for this channel. If you want more information, click the link in the description below or hop on Discord and ask me directly.